The main goal of this channel is to help people become successful when it comes to console modding. I've been doing this for about 4 years now. I've done all sorts of console mods from the NES RGB, the N64 RGB, DC Digital. I've even done a few Xbox 360 RGH mods, and those are not easy. I know how difficult it can be in the beginning. There's a lot to learn, a lot of information out there, so I've got 10 tips to be successful when it comes to retro console modding. Tip number 1 is that having the right tools is very important. When it comes to soldering irons, having a variable temperature iron is the most important thing. You should be able to set the temperature appropriately for whatever you're doing. You need to be able to turn it up if you've got a big ground plane or something, or turn it down if you're doing something that's very delicate. When it comes to solder, I like to use really thin solder. It may seem counterintuitive, like you're not gonna have enough solder when you go to do it, but it's all about control. The slower that you can introduce the solder, the more control that you have about how much or how little that you add in that certain scenario. And using good quality flux is really important too. Flux will help the solder and wires melt together better and help prevent bridges if you've got 2 solder pads or 2 wires that are close to each other. Some other helpful tools to have in your kit would be solder braid, which will help you remove solder from things. Maybe even a solder sucker so that you can remove solder from a via. You may even want to invest in a desoldering gun because that will make desoldering jobs a whole heck of a lot easier. Just remember that you don't need the most expensive tools, you just need the right tools for the job. Tip number 2 is that practice makes perfect. I know that may seem obvious, but some of the skills, such as soldering, are not really skills that you can develop by watching somebody or reading about them. That's something that you're only gonna get better at by doing it. Soldering is the most fundamental skill when it comes to modding. You shouldn't really dive into a mod. You should probably practice on something, maybe a broken electronic that you have, or you can even go to like a Goodwill or something and buy maybe a radio or something that you can mess around with. Practice soldering wires to things, practice desoldering chips, removing chips from the board. Just get really used to using all of the tools that you have. Along the same lines, tip number 3 is start simple. If the mod that you want to do is something that's really complicated, like an N64 RGB or NES RGB mod, maybe take a step back and try out a mod that's easier. Voltar actually recommends doing like a cartridge battery replacement. Some of the cartridges, like for Game Boy games or Super Nintendo games, have a little battery inside that's used to help save the game. Practice removing and replacing those batteries after you've had practice on something else, and that way you've got your first mod under your belt. Once you get a battery replacement under your belt, then maybe move up to something like a SNES RGB mod, which is a relatively easy mod on a Super Nintendo Junior. I have actually got a link in the description to my SNES RGB mod install video. Tip number 4 is do as much research as possible on the mod that you want to do. That kind of goes without saying. You really want to do things like read the written instructions by whoever made the mod, maybe even watch a video that they've created about how to do the mod, watch someone else do the mod, maybe on YouTube. You really want to do research from multiple different people too. Don't just take a single source as the only information that you get. That way you get a pretty well-rounded idea about what you're up against. Tip number 5 is see if there's an easier mod. Sometimes some consoles like the N64, there are multiple different versions of the actual console. If you were thinking about doing the N64 RGB mod from Tim Worthington, there's actually a much simpler N64 RGB mod from Voltar that takes a lot less effort and a lot less work to accomplish nearly the same thing. Especially if you're new at modding, I would highly recommend you start somewhere simpler. Tip number 6 is to get involved with the modding community. There are a lot of great resources out there that you'll definitely want to take advantage of as you start doing mods and maybe as you start making mistakes with mods. You can check out Retro RGB's channel. Bob has a bunch of great soldering tutorial videos. Check out Voltar on YouTube too. He has a ton of really advanced mods that he does with great instructions. You can check out the Shmups forum. That's a great place to post about any problems that you have, and people are generally pretty good about giving you good advice about what to do. You can even check out Reddit. There's a lot of great subreddits for different consoles and even some for console modding. Tip number 7 is that confidence is key. Once you start learning how to solder and maybe even doing a few of the easier console mods, you'll see how amazing it feels to actually think that you can do a mod and be confident in your abilities to do the mod. That's one of the most powerful things that I've learned. you can almost get to a state where any mod that you can think of is not really off the table. You may not know if you can do that mod 100%, but you have the confidence that you can find out how to do that mod, trust in your soldering skills, and then when you mess something up, you'll be able to figure out how to find out how to fix that thing. It's important to be patient and take your time when it comes to mods too. The worst thing that you can do is get frustrated, because that will increase your likelihood that you're going to make the matters worse. Tip number 8 is that even with practice, you're going to fail. Unfortunately, none of us are born with this skill of soldering. You'll probably run into a mod that you're not going to be able to do, or you think you might be able to do it, but you're not going to do it successfully, and you're going to ruin a console. As you gain more confidence, you're going to want to attempt more difficult mods. It's just a fact of life that you might irreversibly mess up a console. I'm not trying to talk you out of console modding. I just want you to be prepared for that moment when you mess something up, and don't take it too personally. It happens to a lot of people, and a lot of people that have gone through the journey of console modding have been in your shoes. So don't be too hard on yourself and keep trying. And that goes along with tip number 9, and that is learn from your mistakes. You probably won't get that many chances to do different mods unless your job is literally doing console modding. But if you're a normie like me and you only mod your own consoles, then you really need to take advantage of your successes and your failures and get as much out of them as possible. If you do make a mistake, you need to take a step back, think about what went wrong, and think about how you could avoid doing that thing in the future. Last but not least, tip number 10 is learn how to Google. That's one of the most important skills when it comes to any technical skill set. Being able to translate what is going on, what you just did, and what is happening, and being able to put that into Google search and finding an answer for your specific problem. Now, this can be kind of difficult if you don't understand completely the mod that you're doing. When you're doing your research about a mod, you really need to do things like learn the terminology of the mod, learn the different parts of the console that you're going to be modding, be very succinct with what your problem is or what specific question that you're asking. You need to be relatively specific in order for Google to help you to find the answer. Give this video a like if you found these tips helpful, and put any of your tips for new modders in the comments. I'll see you in the next video.